For more insight, let's bring in Hal Kempfer, retired Marine intelligence officer, also the host of the Strat podcast. Sir, it's good to see you. We just heard from President Trump, who says Iran is confused about who their leadership is, and that's what's ultimately leading the White House to reject the latest proposal from them. How much of a hurdle is that when it comes to negotiations, when you don't even really know who you're negotiating with?
Well, Alex, it's a huge problem. Major General Vahidi, the head of the Revolutionary Guard Corps, seems to be basically controlling everything. He did not go to Islamabad. He was not who we were talking about. We're talking with when Vice President Vance went over there, it was with the Speaker of the Parliament, which is Galibaf. But even though he has a background with the IRGC, former Brigadier General, not the same guy, currently in a different position, and it makes it rather confusing. If you get some sort of agreement or head nods in the negotiations, that doesn't necessarily mean when it goes back to Tehran that hardcore extremist group in the Revolutionary Guard Corps is going to basically agree to whatever it was. And what we've seen at the latest proposal is they kind of went back to these more extreme positions. They want to keep having develop nuclear weapons, ballistic missiles. They want to control the strait, all of these things that we just will not accept.
Yeah, it's interesting because just because, like you said, you're getting head nods from somebody doesn't mean that their motives, intentions, or desires are exactly what's being conveyed in that moment across the table. I feel like we're going back to the beginning of this conflict where we're now once again talking about how much longer we got left. We see the White House saying that this war is terminated, even House Speaker Mike Johnson saying the war's over. Fact of the matter is, though, the U.S. still has that military presence right there in the Middle East. Obviously, it's also coming at the same time as this 60-day deadline has come and gone. The White House saying that doesn't even really matter because of the ceasefire. Where do you currently stand about where things are and how much longer there is and whether or not you agree with the White House that this war is over?
Well, the War Powers Act has been in effect for well over 50 years, and it has never been implemented. I remember vaguely, I wasn't very old when it happened, but I do remember that this was put in after Vietnam, and it was to stop another Vietnam, none of these really long wars. The problem is you get into the definition of war. We're currently not in major combat operations against Iran. So technically, that's true. However, a naval blockade is normally under international law considered an act of war. All right, we have a naval blockade in place. It really depends on what Congress wants to do with this and how they want to do it. I mean, Friday was a 60-day deadline, but it is correct. We were in a ceasefire, and we have been in this position before. I can think back to Beirut, Lebanon back in the early 80s. I can think back to the Balkans in the 90s. I can think back to Somalia in the 90s. All these things extended well beyond 60 days, but it was the definition of what were the nature of our actions. Even though there was combat going on, what was the nature of our actions? Was it war or was it something else? And I think that's where the White House is saying we're not in full-scale warfare mode with them. We're in something else.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting point, whether or not we've changed from combat to economic hardships. Pentagon saying that the U.S. blockade on the Strait of Hormuz costing Iran nearly $5 billion in oil revenue brings up the question is how long can Iran actually last in a conflict like this? I want to take a listen to what former Chief of Staff for President Trump, Mick Mulvaney, said earlier today, and I'll get your opinion on the other side.
Iranians are not fighting to win the war. They are fighting not to lose. This is a war of survival for them. And this is what the really big issue is. You heard President Trump talk about just about every single time he talks about the war, it's costing Iran $500 million a day in oil revenue. And he's absolutely right. The question is, can the Iranians sustain that for a long period of time? The American policy right now seems to be to make this an economic war.
So has this really shifted to become an economic war? Is that why you think the White House can lean on saying things like the war is over? Because essentially combat's out and economic sanction is in?
Generally speaking, the blockade seems to be working. It stopped them from exporting oil. These new sanctions just put in place will really deter a lot of shippers around the world from ever paying that toll fee to go through the Strait of Hormuz because they know there'll be strong repercussions on the other side. But the big thing is about 2.5 weeks, Iran runs out of places to store oil, and they're going to have to stop production in the oil fields. When they stop pumping oil, some of those wells that have been around for a very long time may not ever be able to get started again. So they're going to lose that. The real, their currency, is in free fall. For foodstuffs, their buying power is down about 1/10 of what it was if you go back previously, and they're seeing about 70% inflation across
Right.
the board. In other words, they've got economic issues.
Yeah, no doubt about it. That's Hal Kempfer. Thank you very much for your time and your service today, sir. Coming up,
Thank you,
doubling
Alex.
down.